Welcome to When a Casserole is Not Enough, Extremely Practical Tips for Building Extended Communities of Care, Part 2. So when last we saw each other in Part 1, uh, we were talking about asking for help. So one trick or tip about asking for help is start with something small and low stakes. And that can build up your confidence and your asking for help muscles. And of course, asking for help is not a literal muscle. It's not like a bicep in this, but it is the more you ask for help, even though sometimes it can get harder because you're like, oh my God, I've asked so many people for so many things. But also, you can become more skilled at communication around it and it can become less awkward. The first time you ask for help and the first time you ask someone specific for help can often be, I don't want to say it's the hardest time, but there is something about getting through that initial piece that can give you some confidence. Can also scaffold. If you've asked somebody close to you for a small favor, you can expand the exercise by making a similar request to someone that you're maybe not as close to. And maybe even something harder to ask for, something that feels like a bigger deal or might take more time. Also, school your support people. When I had my 7,500 knee replacements, folks cooked for me, which was, I appreciated so much. But one time somebody brought a Brussels sprout casserole. There are, I would say, almost all things in the world I can try and eat. Brussels sprouts are just not one of them. And I know they're better now than they were 20 years ago. And I know you can cook them with bacon. I know all that, but Brussels sprouts are very hard for me. So giving a little kind feedback, maybe not to the Brussels sprouts person, but when I put out the list saying, hey, I eat everything but Brussels sprouts, is a kindness both to myself, so I don't have Brussels sprouts that I can't eat, and also to the person cooking, because the person wants to cook you something that you can eat, right? So if it's hard for you to do this, and it was a little hard for me, what I would try and remember is that when I'm doing a favor for somebody, if I'm providing care for somebody, I want the feedback. I want to know if I'm not actually meeting their needs. So think of it, frame it in terms of a kindness for both people. All right. So people can't read your mind. And the reason folks can't read your mind, I mean, I guess I don't need to tell you why people can't read your mind, but there's also the other thing of people can't read your mind because they can't read your mind. They don't know to be reading your mind. Right. So this is the example that I use. In a very long time ago, I emceed the Mr. Philadelphia Drag King, Mr. Drag King Philadelphia. And I was playing a character and Frank, and I was going to do a little sketch about cooking with Frank that was like, supposedly how men cook or whatever. It was a long time ago. Anyway, so I like chopped up carrots with a hammer and that kind of thing. And I told the judges, who were all, part of the sketch, the judges for the competition, but they're also on stage. I said, okay, I'm going to do like some funny things. Like I'm going to pour a beer into a blender and then I'm going to open up a can of dog food and take a bite of it and put it in with the beer. Like, I think that that's good cooking, And it was a long time ago. Anyway, so they're all, and I was like, I'm going to bring it over for you guys so if you can take a bite too, like I'm serving some great food. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. And so I got on stage. I opened up the can of Alpo, actually. I took a bite of it. It was way grosser than I thought it was going to be. I should have probably tried eating dog food before I tried eating dog food on stage. And then it was kind of gross, but anyway, I got through it. And then I took it over to the judges and they were like, oh my God, that stinks so bad. Get that out of here. And I was like, afterwards, they did not take a bite of it, by the way. And then afterwards, I was like, what? You guys said you were going to take a bite of dog food. And they're like, it never occurred to us that you would be using real, actual dog food. And it had never occurred to me to tell them that I would be using real, actual dog food, right? So that is part of the miscommunication. We don't know what we don't know, right? So people cannot read your mind, even when it really seems like they should know what you're feeling or what you need, because they can't, right? Yeah. So troubleshooting. So people asked about caregiving burnout. Now, ideally, mutual aid as more of a framework rather than I'm not just caring for somebody, we are all caring for each other. A change of perspective, reframing that everyone has something to give, right? That can help with caregiving burnout, and also even sometimes care receiving burnout as well. So that is one thing that really helps. The other thing is, and I have a older friend, very dear older friend her partner was going through a very, very long battle with cancer. And I said, oh, how are you getting through this? Like what, what's working for you? And she said, you know what, Kelly? I always make sure to get enough sleep. And I know that's like one of those caregiver things where people are like, take care of yourself. And you're like, oh, thanks. I never thought of that. But in fact, sometimes just going to bed, if you can, sometimes you can't, but just going to bed and seeing what things are like in the morning can work a miracle. Also, something to think about in caregiving, who shows up and who doesn't has nothing to do with how much they love you. And it's so annoying because there are people who, when my partner Heather had cancer, when my partner Cheryl had cancer, when I had 8,000 knee replacements after an infection, there were people who showed up for me that I always thought didn't like me. There are people who showed, and maybe they didn't. Maybe they just showed up for me because sometimes we show up for each other. And there are people who I really, really loved that were conveniently busy. And I'm saying that kind of sarcastically, but whether a person shows up for you has very little to do with you, has very little to do with even your relationship, and has much more to do with them. Now, that doesn't mean if somebody conveniently disappears every time you need something from them, that doesn't mean you don't need to reconsider your relationship. I'm not saying that at all, or just give them a pass. But I am saying that it doesn't mean that they don't love you. And I found that out, I would say, the hard way. Um, it really has to do with people's baggage and their capacity at the moment, right? And I'm not using baggage sarcastically. I mean, really, that sometimes people are holding something very heavy and they don't know where the handle is, So, caregiving also, this is so both chronic and acute illness, and I will say in some cases disability, is very isolating. And so moving the fun stuff to the person, to the care recipient or less mobile persons, moving the fun stuff consensually to that person's place can be life changing. Okay, so my partner died in February of, and the previous Halloween, so only like 3 months beforehand, we hosted a huge Halloween party at our house. Heather wanted to have a Halloween party. She wasn't really at the point where she was going out anymore. So if she wanted to be a part of a Halloween party, it had to be at our house. And I'm so glad some really amazing memories are there. And Heather really appreciated it. And then everyone got to enjoy themselves and not be excluding Heather. So life changing. Care can be energizing and it can be fun, even when situations are difficult. Not always, but it can be. But still have dates and friends hang out that are not about caregiving, right? It's easy to slide into that, especially with partners. But to have a deliberate date that's not going for chemo is great for both people, or however many people are involved in the relationship. Also, in terms of troubleshooting, build language around saying, yes, I can, and I can do this other thing as well. No, I can't. No is an okay thing to say. And no, I can't, but I can't do this thing, but I could do another thing. Or I maybe can do it another time. Or please ask me next week. Right? And this is really important. If someone can say no to you, it means you can trust their yes. Shout out to Stacy Bias, who's the first person who told that to me. And then just finally, when my partner Cheryl was in the hospital, she got worse, or her friend Derek brought this beautiful chandelier, this like glass light thing from a movie set he was on, I believe. And he brought it to us and we put it up when she had a private room. And then, it wasn't that big. It wasn't a full size chandelier, but it was like kind of a brightly colored glass thing. Beautiful. And when she got moved to the ICU, we took it with us. Now, I didn't try and put it up at the ICU. I put it in the drawer. That was much more, that was the only way we could manage it. But then later, when we were moving beds, the nurse was like, who brings a chandelier to the ICU? And I was like, you know what? My people bring a chandelier to the ICU. And that's part of our strengths, bringing the chandelier to the ICU. So I've got some resources, the books I named, anything that we referenced here that has a specific website or whatever is at this bit.ly Casserole for us. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, you can also put them in the comments. I'll keep my eye out for it. And yeah, thanks.